Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another podcast for the Police Society for Problem-Based Learning. Today, we're going to be talking about practical changes, navigating curriculum, and training in police academies. So, in recent years, police academies across the world have come under increasing scrutiny to modernize their approaches to training. Traditional methods, which often prioritize physical and tactical skills, may no longer be fully equipped to complex or current challenges that we face right now. As public expectations evolve, so most of the curriculum, teaching strategies, and training methods with these academies should evolve. The need for a comprehensive approach to education, one that includes critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and social awareness, is more pressing than ever. In today's episode, we'll explore the changing landscape of police training with board members Gerard Cleveland and Tim Hegarty, who is a retired captain from the Riley County, Kansas Police Department and certified level 2 problem-based learning instructor. In 2006, he introduced PBL into his agencies, new recruit officer training, and later expanded it to areas of new dispatcher and corrections officer training. He has been involved in law enforcement education for 25 years, and he currently works for the Hawaii Department of Law Enforcement. Welcome again today. And I'm going to start with a question, maybe for Tim, to welcome him to our podcast. What are some of the most pressing challenges facing police academies today, and what are some doable solutions that we can implement?
Well, when I think of challenges, one word comes to mind, and that is the disconnect. So there's an overarching disconnect between what is taught and what is used. And some research would suggest that 80% of what is taught in academies is only used 20% of the time post-academy, actually in field work. And that shouldn't surprise any of us who know anything about the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, power law theory. That's the nature of existence. So that should not surprise us. But the bigger disconnect is often between academies that don't use any kind of PBL, and then recruits go to agencies in which there is PBL used in recruit officer training, or what's more likely the case is a state academy where there is no problem-based learning going on. And then you go into post-academy field training, in which there's also likely no problem-based learning going on, but where there is, you haven't really been prepared for that. So it's not only the content. There's a disconnect between the content and the core competencies that are needed, but there's a disconnect between how it's delivered, which in most academy settings is very instructor-centered. And when the recruit gets into the field, particularly when a recruit is in a solo officer mode, there is no instructor to lead his or her learning. If that officer hasn't been equipped with the skills to self-direct learning or to reach into the environment around them, or if there isn't this what one theorist calls this scaffolding. If the scaffolding isn't built around a recruit to help them learn what they need to learn, but they don't know right now and cannot learn all by themselves, then we have officers who can't function in 80% of the real world when it comes to policing. So I think the disconnect is a challenge, but we shouldn't just look at it entirely negatively. any problem-based learning is better than none at all. So I think we'll sure expand upon this, but in an academy, it doesn't have to be the entire academy that uses it in order for there to be some benefit, as long as there is an instructor that uses it, or as long as there's a block of instruction that incorporates it. If it's there somewhere, that's still better than it not being there at all. And when the recruit goes into the post-academy training, if it's there somewhere rather than not at all, um, that's better for the recruit. So I think that there's positives out there, but by and large, it still remains very academy training, uh, very teacher-centered, um, very passive environment for the student. And we're going to talk about this later in the question, but I think today's student cannot adapt to that as well as, say, students of my era generation could, when you were expected just to, okay, assume that everything you're being taught has some use, even if you don't understand it. And I think now they want to understand something's utility when it's being presented to them, rather than making assumption that everything has a basic and inherent utility uh, for their post-academy um, learning. So I think disconnect, and has been for some time and will continue to be, but I think there are there are signs that things are getting better in some places.
I believe, it's funny. I went recently to a trade show here at the Surrey's town. And Surrey's is a military based town. They have the Canadian Army training there, different units. I forgot the name because I'm not an army person. Sorry about that. And one of the things, I was going around the different booths, they had the Winnipeg Police training. And maybe I'm going to put them on the spotlight. But I was curious about, because they were trying to recruit for people to go into the training. And one of the main questions, because I knew I was going to have this podcast, was to the lady that was trying to promote the academy or recruit people to go into training, was like, well, what kind of methodology do you use to train these new recruits? Right? And she was like, well, what do you mean? I said, yeah, what kind of training methodology? Adult learning. I was trying to ask her direct questions, and she couldn't grasp what I was asking her to do. Or the question in itself. And I mentioned, well, do you use PowerPoint? Do you use maybe some case scenarios? Oh, you got it. All of those things we have. I would say, well, can you name other ones? Well, PowerPoint. And she named the same ones that I was trying to say. And I'm thinking, well, I think that's what you refer to. There's that disconnect. If I'm trying to also recruit students to get them inspired, right? Would I be able to tell them, we have the different type of training, so to get you prepared so that you're not out of the loop or you don't feel disconnected with the society around you, or you're feeling more prepared mentally to go and deal with these situations when you encounter them. I don't know. I was thinking about the recruitment part, but at the same time, I was trying to dig more information about that. So I didn't see anything that inspired me, or the students that I had with me, to say, yes, I am going to become a police officer in the future. So I think there's also that disconnect in how we mention to our society how we're training our recruits, because we might have amazing academies out there that they're doing amazing job training, like in Kansas City, in the different background that you have, team, but we're not telling the people these things as well, right? And they're getting the same maybe stereotyping that we have, that they're not getting trained well, and they're getting trained with a bias, right? And the students are not, you mentioned that 80/20, right? And even if you have some PBL, even if it is the 20%, the one instructor that does it is better than nothing. Absolutely right, right? They have that little sense of, I got a little bit of a taste, and maybe I can apply it when I go out in the world. And that's what I saw in the college that I teach, that at the beginning, when I was the only one doing it, it was it was going against I guess, the tide, right? It was very hard being the first one to break through the icebreaker, maybe, if you want to call it that way. But now that you have different people, and then you have a dean that is inspired by the work that we're doing, and he's actually also looking forward to give feedback to other instructors to say, how can we change the classroom so they're not a passive training, but it's also that active learning that is happening at all times. So it's interesting to see the different, even in Canada, how the training, there's a disconnect as well. And we don't have also the management or the hierarchy of the academies, the top hierarchy, really willing to try something different that is maybe scary at the beginning, but it can give so many benefits after. And yes.
Well, I just was going to say that change is difficult, and it is challenging, and it puts people outside of their comfort zone. That's that's how the best learning takes place, is not within the zone of what you already know.
Mhm.
It's within the zone of what you don't know. And the key to really good PBL, as I mentioned this before, to use the word of an academic, the key to PBL is to have the scaffolding built around the student when you um, are pushing them towards something they don't know. And where I've seen this go not well, in my own circumstance, my own agency, uh, is this misguided concept that problem-based learning is figure it out on your own. And we would have officers as part of their research into the ill-structured problem or their neighborhood uh, portfolio exercise, or any of the other um, learning tasks in the recruit officer training program. They would go to supervisors, or they would go to a training officer who wasn't a very good police training officer, and they would be told, well, you got to figure that out on your own. That's problem-based learning. You've got a problem, you got to figure it out on your own. And yes, sometimes we will encounter learning that problems that we do have to solve by ourselves. But most of the time, we have some sort of network around us.
Mhm.
And the the facilitator, the instructor, whether it's the training officer and the instructor in the academy setting, is the guide to that scaffolding or that is built around the learner. And even a guide has to know exactly where the learner needs to go, even if there are multiple routes to get there. And the guide recognizes when they're on a different route, but they're still going to get there, or they're on a different route and they're not going to get there. So the person will have to be prompted, or the group has to be prompted to get back on the right track. So it's very complicated. I think one of the reasons, and I know we're going to delve into this more probably, that PBL is not more accepted, not just because it's different, which is what you've encountered, but I think from a facilitation standpoint, from the instructor's perspective, it's much harder. And that's been my personal experience. It is much more difficult to prepare as a facilitator for problem-based learning, because you have to be able to deliver the right prompt in the right circumstance. It could be personalized individually, it could be personalized to a cohort, but you got to be ready for everything. And so it's not easy at all to do well. And I think that's one of the things um, that that is a roadblock in the way, is the challenge of it, and sometimes people not wanting a challenge.
Yeah, you're totally right. According to those, the mentally like capacity or no capacity. I think well, most of my classes are PBL, design thinking. And when we do those classes, you are at the end of the day mentally exhausted because you have to be on top of things at all times, saying, okay, they're going the wrong direction. I need to guide them a little bit, that scaffolding that you're talking about. I had a great mentor, Jan Sullivan, that she mentioned is like having a piece of paper and you're writing your lesson plan, but you're filling out the white areas of your lesson plan that you didn't think about it. It's filling in the edges of the lesson plan. That's asking the right prompt at the right time. Or maybe there's a couple of questions that are coming exactly the same from different groups. Maybe I should reinforce this subject a little bit more. Maybe I should talk about that a little bit more or emphasize that a little bit more, right? So at the end of the day, I am totally exhausted mentally. Like, I don't want to do anything. I just want to cook. For me, cooking is that break. Just do nothing. That's it. And just take a little break for a couple of hours. Because, yes, I think that's when it comes for a PBL facilitator. You have to be more on top of what the students are doing. Not that you don't have the control over them. So you just need to make sure that you guide them, maybe like a shepherd
I,
does.
I think the C word, the control word, is another key in all of this. And when it's instructor-centered, that's where the control is at. And chaos, I think, is the enemy of of a typical educator, trainer, because you don't know where it's going to go. But in that chaos, and there's this great potential, and you have to expend the energy to harness that potential and help your students create order out of that chaos.
Oh, very inspiring. Okay, and I think we have another guest that has joined us, Jerry. I still see you like a Wilson. I'm sorry, I'm saying it out loud. But I don't know if you would like to introduce Art.
Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Can you see me at all?
Yes, we can see you. No problems. And we
Oh
can
my
hear you very
goodness.
well.
Okay. Good evening, and thank you for the invitation. Um, you have a topic that really strikes right to my heart and has so for many years in the academy setting.
Yes, we have heard from Jerry the great things that you're doing at your academy. So we'll look forward hearing a little bit more about that. So maybe we should go on for the next question and maybe you can help us out a little bit. So we're thinking about maybe changing teaching strategies at the academy, right? That's where we lead in the last question. It's a little bit more difficult being the icebreakers. Um, so thinking about the traditional methods that you're currently using in police training, or that different academies are currently using in police training, and how your academies they do it differently. What are some of the small things that we can modify to see a couple of quick outcomes or better outcomes, even if it takes a year or a few years? In your experience, what are those when you came back from the maybe the PBL training? What were those first things that you tried and said, let me try it out, let's see if it worked, and was it easy to do that?
Certainly. One of the things we realized immediately was you're not going to do this alone. So we built a consensus of trained and experienced people. And once we decided to press forward with better methodologies, we had someone at our elbow who could help us. We had people in agreement to drive this forward. We started to set examples on how it could be improved. Classroom methodologies at the time were, well, PowerPoint in large part, and then lecture, droning on and on. And I was right there with the rest of the folks in my monotone voice, providing that lulling to sleep by just constantly talking. Once we found a better way, we created examples. We rewarded students for their knowledge and participation. We see some academy models where you stay quiet, you stand up straight, you don't respond until I tell you what you need to respond as. We turned that on its ear and got something different. But consensus and then providing examples. A lot of our staff, we wanted to make sure that people who didn't have a lot of experience with proper adult education had some success. So we would stage success in various ways. So they would see better results in a classroom, and in some cases would want to take part in that. But setting the example and having a consensus were key.
Okay. We mentioned maybe a couple of the adult learning methodology or principles, and I briefly asked another lady at a trade show what kind of adult learning they were applying. Maybe anyone can give me examples, quick examples that people can do quickly in the classroom instead of having a PowerPoint. What can we do effectively in the classroom that we can change things around? So instead of the instructor having the control, maybe having that active learning scenario. Anyone is welcome to answer that.
In our case,
I'll jump. Oh, go ahead, Art. You go ahead.
When we started out, having experience through the PBL class, what adult learning could be, we found small ways. Getting students involved in their own education. You're going to need an affable instructor who draws people out and is willing to hear people out. Getting students to be comfortable talking in class, to speak up, to address an instructor and give their ideas out. That's not a common thing. But once you set that in motion, the class will see that. So getting students to talk was important. And there's a variety of strategies that work with that. But respecting them as learners, respecting them as adults.
Jerry, you had something else to add?
Well, I think any book you can go to, there's so many great curriculum books out there. There's a whole book about learning in adulthood is the classic. So you could use Merriman and Baumgartner's book, Learning in Adulthood. It's 30, 40 years old. It gets updated. It's now in its 4th edition. Every instructor in your academy should have access to that book and should just go in there. This is a profession. And I think at the beginning of our discussion, Milena and Tim, you two are way too nice. So you go, just some of you do it. I think we're talking about taxpayers' dollars and the kind of recruit that's being produced into the market. And it's like Art's place. It's not good enough just to let some people continue to do bad training. And what we have to start doing is have an expectation of professionalism across academic institutions. Where I taught for the last 16 years at the university, throughout all of the agencies that I go to, they're great at saying, oh, well, we've got this one classroom that does that kind of stuff. That's like going to a financial wealth development company and saying, we have one accountant or one economist who's actually making money for us. The rest of them aren't. Or one law firm. We've got one lawyer who's actually going to court and doing cases. And if we accept that kind of mediocrity, we're going to get a mediocre product in our communities. And as a person who's a taxpayer, like all of you, you want the best bang for your buck. So I'm not going to be so nice as you and Tim. And Art's absolutely right. It's got to be a team effort. And I'm not saying you and Tim are absolutely correct. It's a start small, eat the elephant one bite at a time. But here's 3 things that I think right now, and I'll get your listeners to write these down. And this is, my experience. When we designed this, we had no idea there would be the pushback in policing to get rid of substandard, inefficient, and unproductive training. And it has been, and the reason is because, as you said, and Art and Tim said, it's scary and it's hard. So it's easy just to whack a PowerPoint up onto the wall and just take control of the class and do all the talking, and they don't do any of the learning. So here.
That wraps up today's conversation on evolving training strategies in police academies. As we heard from Gerard Cleveland, there are key areas that need attention if we want to see real improvements in academic training. From shifting away from rigid traditional teaching methods to integrating more problem-based learning approach, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence into the curriculum. These changes are essential for preparing recruits for the complexities of modern law enforcement. We also explore how instructor development plays a crucial role in this evolution, ensuring that trainers are equipped to engage new generations of recruits effectively. If you're involved in law enforcement training, now is the time to assess your academy's approach and identify where meaningful improvements can be made. Write us to info@pspbl.org and check our website for upcoming training opportunities. Next time, we will learn the top tips from Jerry and learn further on our board's expertise. Keep pushing the boundaries of learning and leadership in law enforcement.